Welcome to another study. We're going to study how to get faith and how faith develops within us. We're going to study the story of Abraham from the Bible. Abraham is called by the Bible the father of faith, so it's probably a great place to start. And we're going to see how he developed the faith to get to that point to be called the father of faith. So we're going to be coming from the book of Genesis for over the next several studies to see how do we develop faith. Genesis 12:1 starts out like this. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go out from your country, your relatives, and your father's household, to the land that I will show you. Then I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great so that you will exemplify divine blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but the one who treats you lightly I must curse. And all the families of the earth will bless one another by your name." Abraham, when he started out, his name was Abram, not Abraham. It was changed later to Abraham, and we'll talk about that later in this study. But what we want to look at is the book of Genesis. It's interesting because we call our online campus Genesis, because Genesis means beginning. It's the start of something new. So when you read the book of Genesis, it's a lot of new things, except for the account chapters 1 and 2, which is about creation. The first 11 chapters of Genesis record one failure of mankind after another. Failures that are being repeated today. The first man and woman disobeyed God and were cast out of the garden. Cain murdered his brother Abel and lied about it. Humanity became so corrupt that God cleansed the earth with a flood. Noah got drunk, had an incident with his son Ham, and cursed Ham's son Canaan. In defiance to God, men built a city and then a tower to try to reach heaven, and God had to send confusion to end the rebellion. Disobedience, murder, deception, drunkenness, nudity, rebellion. Sound pretty up to date, doesn't it? Sounds like something that's happening every day on a regular basis. Most of us, if we were God and we saw people being disobedient, especially after we created them in our image, probably want to destroy them, send lightning down and take them out. But God didn't do that. Well, God had a plan already in place. He had a plan for what he wanted to do, and that plan would ultimately end up being his son, Jesus Christ. But instead, what he did, he called a man and his wife to leave their home, go to a new land so they might give humanity a new beginning. Now, Abram and Sarah didn't know God at that point. God spoke to them. And Abraham decided to follow God's voice. So Abraham was not someone who had served God his whole life. He wasn't a Jew, because the Jews didn't come into existence at this point. But he was someone, when he heard God's voice, he knew it, and he responded to God's voice. And the journey he took to become the father of faith is an example for all of us who are disciples of Jesus Christ, and how to walk by faith, not by sight, and become true disciples. Abraham was saved by faith and lived by faith, and his obedience was the evidence of his faith. He obeyed when he did not know where, how, when, or why, and so should we. He stepped out on faith, not even knowing where to go, but that's what faith is. And he learned to trust God, to believe God. Abraham and his wife were not perfect, but their walk was generally characterized by faith and faithfulness. When they sinned or disobeyed God and missed the mark, they suffered for it. And the Lord was always ready, however, to forgive them when they repented. As we study this life, we're going to learn what faith is and how to walk by faith, how we can become faithful as well. We'll discover that when you trust the Lord, no test is impossible, and no failure is permanent. Faith is not based on feelings, though emotions are certainly involved. True faith is based on God's word. It's based on loving God with your heart, your mind, and your soul, giving him everything, trusting him completely at his word, and trusting that what he says is going to come to pass will. God spoke to Abraham and told him what he would do for him and through him if he would trust and obey. But it didn't all happen at once. How we respond to God's promises determine what God does in our lives. The Hebrew word translated covenant has several meanings, and God made a covenant with Abraham. It means one, to eat with, which suggests fellowship and agreement. Second, to bind or fetter, which means commitment. And third to a lot would suggest sharing. When God makes a covenant, he enters into an agreement to commit himself, to bind himself to that, to fellowship and agree and share with us. He follows up and delivers on what he promises he's going to do. The first steps of faith are not always giant steps, which explains why Abraham didn't fully obey God. Abraham was new to his relationship with God, just like we can be when we start out. He was learning how to worship and trust God. Instead of leaving his family like he was told to do, he took his father's nephew Lot with him when he left Ur, and then he stayed at Haran until his father died. Whatever you bring with you from your old life into the new life is likely to create problems. And we're going to learn that lesson just as Abraham did. Terah, Abraham's father, kept Abraham from fully obeying the Lord. Lot created problems, serious problems for Abraham, until they finally had to agree to part. And Abram and Sarah brought a sinful agreement with them from Ur and got them into trouble twice. The life of faith demands total separation from what is evil and total devotion to what is holy, God. And Abram and Sarah learned this, and we will too. As we study the life of Abraham, you'll discover that he was often tempted to compromise, and he yielded at times. God tests us to build up our faith and bring out the best in us. But when the enemy tempts us, it's to destroy our faith and bring out the worst in us. When we walk by faith, we have to learn how to lean on God alone, to trust his word, to trust his character, to trust his will, to trust his power. We don't isolate ourselves from our friends and family, but we no longer consider them our first love or our first obligation. Our love for God is so strong that it makes family love look like hatred in comparison. God calls us alone, and we must not compromise. When God says he wants us to follow him, we have to follow him regardless of whether anyone else does. Faith demands commitment. When we say we're going to become a disciple of Jesus Christ, we're saying we're going to commit to a life of following God. Obedience leads to new assurance and new promises from God. When you walk by faith, you know that God is with you and you don't need to be afraid. God will work out his purposes and accomplish in and through us all that's in his heart. Most of us, however, unlike Abraham, are not commanded to pull up stakes and go to a strange country. But the challenges we face are just as real, just as important. Sometimes there are serious problems in our home. Sometimes serious problems on the job. Or maybe we're making career decisions, or maybe we want to start a new business. Maybe we're going to a church or a religious institution, and there are problems and wonder why God has permitted those things to happen. If you are to claim your spiritual inheritance in God, if you're to claim your rightful place with God, and to be what God has called you to be and what he designed you to be, you must display faith in God's word and obedience to God's will. See, God doesn't test us for his sake, but for ours, so that we learn how to have faith and trust in God. Till next time.